Hi, I'm Deborah Frost. I'm the Chief Executive of Personal Group, and I'm here today to really focus on thinking about how can you make sure that you're measuring your wellbeing strategy, whatever that might be, to make sure it's effective for your business, your customers, but most importantly, your employees. So it's been really interesting doing this virtual conference, hasn't it? Fantastic experience, I think, and well done to the REBA team for putting all of that together. The conference is all about different aspects of wellbeing, and I've been absolutely astounded by the huge variety of things that you can do and support your employees with. But at the same time, I think, if I'm honest, I've found it quite overwhelming. There are so many things that you can choose from. There are so many ways to enhance people's well-being that actually it feels quite challenging. So one of the things that we've been working on at PG, and particularly at Enecto, which is the reward consultancy part of Personal Group, is thinking about how can you measure the effectiveness of your strategy, and how can you come up with an objective proof that what you're doing is making a difference to the lives of your employees. So over the next 15 minutes, we're going to spend some time getting focused, gaining traction, and identifying what are the key levers you can pull so you can really get started. So what does well-being really mean? You'll be relieved that I'm not going to sit here and go through a long list of all the different aspects that well-being might come up with. What I'm really trying to do today is talk about what works for different organisations. So I'm going to try and help guide you about how can you be sure that you're doing the right things that are making a measurable difference to your employees. I think most organisations have in their value set something about doing the right thing for their employees, whatever that might look like. But actually, how can you be confident that you're doing the right thing and you're not just wasting time and resources going after things that don't really make a difference to your particular organisation? So let's just recap. What do we really know about well-being? So on the one hand, we understand at a deep level that making employees' lives easier, making it easier for them to navigate their life at work, and making work a place of less rather than more stress is really important. It's obvious that using the buying power of your organisation to offer discounts or cycle to work or an employee assistance programme also makes sense. But once you go beneath that initial layer, what does a wellbeing programme really deliver to your business, your investors, your customers, and most importantly of all, your employees? So it's easy for us to measure and manage the inputs. So if you've decided to put in payday loans or yoga sessions or a mindfulness app, that's all great. You can talk about what you've done, but sooner or later, you're going to come up against the question of, well, what difference has it made? So at Enecto, we've been working on a solution to help you benchmark your progress in achieving wellbeing outcomes, both within your own business, and obviously that's going to be a year-on-year process, because I think we all know now, a bit like gender pay, it's not something that you can sort out in 12 months. It takes time to implement a programme and to make sure that it works. But also, how can you make sure that it's effective and you can prove that to your board and investors? Because there's some people out there with some very hard heads who think all of this is great, but they really want to see some return on it. One of the things that at Enecto we've always talked about is enhancing the lifetime value of your employees. And that's both beneficial for the business because it means that you get the most out of your employees from a commercial point of view, but also it's beneficial for the employee because if you're providing an environment where people can really live their best life, do their best work, then that's a benefit to everybody. So this rather unattractive grey blob that's just appeared on the screen, that's the average value of a normal employee. And actually, it's not even the average value because right at the start of employment, we're all costing the organisation money. It takes time for us to get settled in, to get inducted, to learn how to do our jobs. Across the bottom axis, you'll see time, and up the side is output. It's not a very scientific graph, I agree. But let's think about how if you've got your wellbeing offer right and people feel comfortable, they feel that their work matters and that what they're doing makes a difference, all of those things can add up to really enhancing the lifetime value of your employees. The yellow space is really starting to show you the difference between what you might be doing and what your employees could do in the future, assuming that they feel engaged and supported by the business. Right from induction, you can improve the way that people come into the business. You can improve how quickly they can accelerate to competence and achieve a higher level of competence. And then really, once you start to get people socially confident in work, they're learning their job, they're able to perform, then really all the standard benefit stuff comes in. This is the bit where people really feel part of the business. They're performing well, they know that they're valued in the business, and they're taking advantage of everything you're offering them, whether it's bikes to work or technology or anything you can offer them. They're absolutely lapping it up. But every employee at some point comes to the conclusion that they're going to leave their job. And often for the average employee, so our grey blob employee, what starts to happen here is that performance tails off. They're far less interested in the company than they were before, and really their mind has moved to the next organisation they want to work for. With a more highly engaged employee, what you start to see is that that period of time lasts longer when they're performing really well, and that's important. So attrition is lower, staff turnover is lower, and while someone's with you, they're performing to a higher level. And when they do eventually start to go and think about going, it may be that they're not leaving you. That door may not be a door to another organisation, taking away all the training and development that you've given them. It may well be to another job in your organisation. So I think that you can see by starting to track wellbeing outcomes into the employee lifetime value, it's really beneficial, not just for the employee themselves, because it enables them to have a great job that they really enjoy, but also for the business, because it means that people working for the business are able to give of their best. So how do you start to put that together? Well, I'm not going to tell you how you do this. I can give you some ideas about how you might think about it. In Personal Group, we broadly divide up our wellbeing or benefits offer into 4 main categories, and I don't think this is particularly unique. So physical and mental wellbeing, financial and social, and we gather different wellbeing initiatives around that. Now, in building your program, you need to, I'm afraid, go and really talk to your employees. So your very sporty CFO may be telling you that a lifetime subscriptions Peloton will make a massive difference to his wellbeing. Yeah, I'm sure he will. But actually, when you go and talk to the night shift in the food factory that you run or the warehouse that you organise, you may well find that actually they're asking for access to be able to eat a hot meal at night, and that will make a far bigger difference to their well-being than maybe some sort of sport activity or other things, because eating properly is their number one priority. So really going and listening to what your employees want and come up with different things is absolutely crucial. The other thing to think about is how are employees going to access all of your solutions? So often we're finding solutions that are based on company intranets, and that can be really effective. So if you've got people who are sitting behind a desk all day, brilliant, because they can look at it in privacy, they can make their mind up about something they want to access. But take it out of a company desk environment and suddenly it's a different story. So imagine that you've got lorry drivers, and actually in their depot, when they come back to, there's only one office and there's only one terminal where they can access the intranet. And they're hardly going to go into there and say to their supervisor, can you just hoof off the computer for a minute while I go on and try and find the employee assistance line number, and then I'm going to write it down. They're just not going to do that. And so using an app, for example, on a mobile phone, and Happy is something that we've developed, which can pull together and customize all of the solutions that you need, can have a dramatic effect in the effectiveness of how people are using your wellness solution. And in that particular example, the first year that we started tracking this data was 18-19, and what we found was an unbelievable 86% increase in uptake amongst male employees of the employee assistance line. So where previously people had found it really difficult to access, once it was on their phones and they could access it in the cab if they're a lorry driver, or they can access it at home, suddenly you start to see people really using and engaging what you've got. And that enables you to build a wellbeing dashboard with different outcomes. And as I mentioned, we've put together something that allows you to say that, we've put together 4 main areas, but you could make these whatever you want. And the crucial thing about this is that you can look at them independently. So you can look at health, mental health, financial and social as different and independent levers, or you can come up with a net wellbeing score overall for the organisation. But what also happens is that you are able to use it for looking by site, by region. You can split out head office from stores or branches, and it really allows you a level of granularity into how your business is doing and comparing it with last year. And that's probably why at this point getting a baseline on your dashboard is really important before you go on and develop further work on that. The other thing that's really interesting is that when you're looking at creating a benchmark, it's always useful to have some sort of national standard or other objective benchmark to compare it with. And the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, have actually been gathering data on wellness for the last 7 or 8 years. And so there's a whole raft of data there that you can compare your organisation with, you compare it by region, you can compare it even by job type. So there's a lot of information there that will help you say, are we doing well? Are we as an organisation effectively at least hitting the standard for the benchmark? Are we doing better than that? And where are the areas that really we are struggling with and we probably need to try harder and do better? And the overall outcome of putting together a wellness dashboard like this is it's a demonstrable tracking model. So it allows you to demonstrate improvement over time in a format that enables you to be able to demonstrate the success stories to key shareholders, whether that is literally your shareholders or whether it's the board or the finance team. You can demonstrate that you're making a difference with the work that you're doing. And that also led us on to thinking about how do you make use of this objective measure more widely. So any of you that are involved in company annual report or putting together a presentation for investors will know that environmental, social and governance, so ESG measures, are absolutely crucial. Investors are hungry to find objective measures that allow them to see how companies are doing beyond the financial. It can actually be quite tricky to come up with some of these because unless you're creating toxic waste or you've got a problem, for example, with plastics in a supermarket, sometimes these things can be, how do we measure things? How can we come up with something that's objective? The advantage of using the Wellbeing levers model is that you can match it back to the Office for National Statistics, but also you can track it over years, which means that your investors can see and know that you're doing the right thing, and that can be really helpful from that point of view. They see what you mean and they know that you mean what you say. And so in terms of looking at outcomes, we've called this Be Well and Do Well. And what that means is that pulling different levers will have different effects in your organisation. And it's not as clear cut as just pulling one lever affecting that. What we've discovered is that actually by pulling different levers, it has an outcome for all of those different parts of the business. So putting in place some financial help, for example, financial wellness training, or making sure that people know that they can get debt help if they need it, that can have a knock-on effect into mental health. And once you've built the model does all the hard work for you. All you need is the data to drive the results, and the more data you plug in, the more insightful and actionable your report can be. So we all know what gets measured gets done. So by implementing a measurement approach from point zero, and that's now, you can make sure that you're putting resources into the most effective use of your money. You can measure, you can test, you can put something else in, so you can take out any of the initiatives that you've put in place that don't seem to be being used or they don't seem to be that effective. And you can also identify where the key wins are. And fundamentally, that allows you to demonstrate return on investment to the board and investors. But most of all, you know that your employee wellness programme is improving your employees' lives. Be well, do well. So thanks, that's great. Thank you for listening to the presentation. If you're interested in knowing what's next week, Sarah Lardner, who's our Director of Business Innovation, is actually doing a session where she's going to talk about a case study on how to actually use the levers, which I think will be really, really interesting. So really, there's nothing more for me to say, but thanks very much. And I'm here for any questions that you want to ask. Thanks then.
Thank you, Deborah. So much great information in there, and particularly around how to utilise data much more effectively to influence and inform your wellbeing programme. So let's get to questions. I've got a question here from Lynn Johnston asking, is there any global benchmark data for wellbeing, Deborah?
Not that we've found. There probably is, but I think bearing in mind the way that social security and so on differs so vastly in different countries, it's probably going to need to be on a country by country basis. I think probably a global database would be less helpful. So sorry, Lynn, can't give you the answer to that one.
And I've got another question here from Debbie Bullock. If you have several solutions to support, say, mental well-being, how do you identify which one it is that is improving the dashboard score? And how do you get the dashboard score in the first place? Does it involve surveying your colleagues?
So there's two different ways of doing it. You could, just answering the first part of the question, Debbie, you could break down and perhaps test different mental health and usage stats, first of all, and you might look at that by different parts of your business. So you might split out head office and stores, for example, or the depots, depending on what sort of company you're running. But I think there's also an element of testing out usage in terms of saying which are the most highly used activities and making an assumption that if things are well used, then they are the ones that are making the biggest difference to your score, either positive or negative. And then in terms of the way the score works, we gather data on how people's well-being, they assess their own well-being through a simple survey tool, and that gives you information about the individual levers. And then you can simply ask people the ONS questions. So ONS asks some very straightforward questions about how are you feeling today? Are you feeling less anxious than yesterday? Are you happy? Do you feel that your life is worthwhile and satisfactory? So you might just use those to really test the effectiveness, because overall that's the outcome you're looking for. Do people feel that whatever you've put in place has made a difference? But the more data you can gather, obviously the greater level of granularity you can get to, and that gives you the most help in making assessments as to what's working and what's not.
I think kind of following on from that, actually, we've got a question here from Mark Kelly. He's asking, using that scoring model, what would you say is a good indicator of showing improved well-being within your employee population?
Well, I guess that depends from where you start from, doesn't it? So asking people how they feel, and that's why I've mentioned it a couple of times in the presentation, getting baseline data is really important. Often people start off on the journey and then they get to a point a year later where they think, I wish we'd really measured at the start where we were so that we can tell whether things are working or not. So getting some information now about what your base levels are will already give you information you don't know now. It may be that you find that people in one region of the country are much more satisfied with their life than other regions, so you know that from the start. Or it may be that you quickly realise you've got a particular problem with a specific depot or store or area that you need to address very quickly. And then going on from that, you can then start to look at how do we compare across different areas and track data and track trend data, a bit like we've done with gender pay, where you start to see an overall result, but you can also break it down by different levels, different groups of employees within the organisation, and build on from that.
Okay, great, thank you. And we've got another minute left. I've got another question here saying, our organisation wants to improve employee wellbeing, but they don't want to put money behind it. So what can I do to influence those with the purse strings?
It's tricky, isn't it? I mean, I think there's a big feeling within the HR population that actually it's easy to build a link between happy employees and engaged employees that are more productive. So I think the best place to start would probably be with the life cycle diagram that I showed at the beginning. So helping you draw out where are your particular issues, where do you lose staff? How difficult do you find it to attract the right staff? And then how can you make your highest performing and more satisfied staff your norm? Because once that happens, suddenly you're much more productive and the organisation is much more effective. So it's probably digging behind some of those numbers to start to say what difference would happen if you could pull some of these wellbeing levers.
Brilliant. And we're nearly out of time, but just one final question to leave the audience with. What would you say is the one biggest change that they can do to really impact employee wellbeing?
I think whatever you do, mean it and stick to it. There's going to be nothing worse than starting off on a massive journey saying, look at us, we're putting all this money and effort into something, and then a year later it's all disappeared. So maybe start relatively small, track what you're doing, and make sure that you know that it's making a difference to your employees' lives, because that's the most important thing.
Excellent, thank you. Just another fascinating session, lots of practical advice and tips there. So thank you, Deborah, for a great session.